Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Som TV podcast. This is Jason Wise. Today's episode, I have a really special one. Master sommelier and really good friend of mine, Sabato Sagaria, is on. We're going to talk about Amaros. Amaros are, I don't know, these kind of, I just think it's an overwhelming category of a very simple thing. You drink them after dinner. Some you drink before dinners. They used to be medicine. It's a whole big thing with a big, passionate following, and I've wanted to talk about it for a long time. So Sabato's going to get on here. We're going to talk about that. First, I want to tell you that Sparklers is coming to an end. If you've been following it, you know that this show is like no other wine show, because there really isn't any, and no other cooking competition show. And it's building to something incredible. So make sure you catch up, because on February 8th, the finale is coming, and you will not believe it. It's bonkers. So stick with Som TV on Sparklers. Go to somtv.com to subscribe. Remember, this year we have all sorts of stuff. My feature-length film on the Judgment of Paris is coming in May. I have a film about the culture, history, and much more of dishes we eat called The Whole Animal coming in April. We have a feature film coming about restaurants and everything they've gone through from COVID. It is a truly moving and just a wild story that I wish we did not have to tell, coming in February with Master Sommelier and Restaurateur Bobby Stuckey. It's incredibly moving. The fourth Som film is coming in September. This is all coming to Som TV, and that's not even close to the amount of things that we have. So go to somtv.com and subscribe. And without further ado, my friend Sabato here to talk about one of my favorite drinks in the business, Amaro. So, Sabato, it is an honor and a pleasure to have you back on the Som TV podcast. And Sabato, for you listeners, is the executive director of Amaros for Som TV. We pay him quite a bit to travel the world and drink this incredible beverage. We both have a couple of bottles, or a few bottles, or 3 or 4 in front of us of this drink that I want to try hard to at least define, so that we can talk about how special it is. If you're in the beverage industry or the restaurant industry, you're either incredibly passionate about this stuff, or maybe you haven't been exposed to it. I know people who are obsessive. I guess where we're going to start is, Sab, can you define what it is or what it isn't, this drink, Amaro?
Yeah, let's just start with an easy question like that. A broad, easy question like that. And first of all, thanks for the promotion. I didn't realize that. I guess I need to book my trip to go really run up this educational expense bill that I can now utilize.
Your expenses are already high enough. All right, we'll keep going. Yeah. So what do we got on this?
I guess in the most simple form, Amaro means bitter, and Amaros are delicious. So we can just leave it at that, or we can go a little bit further, in the sense that it's a really broad category that doesn't have much, clear definition of what it is or where it can come from. And I think that's what can be challenging. I think for the most part, most of them would be between, I'd say, 15 to 40% alcohol. And there's usually a really cool yin-yang of bitter with a little bit of sweetness on the back end to balance it out. But they can come from all over the world. And they're, delicious on their own. They're delicious in cocktails. They're delicious in spritzes. They're very versatile. I find it so interesting with these that I guess maybe there's not the rules. There's no snobbery with blending it with other stuff. I don't know. My entire introduction to it came in Italy, and then I came home and realized that I had Amaros before, but didn't really know that they were classified as that, such as like. How'd you get introduced to them in Italy?
When we were filming Som 1, I went to film Som 1, and I tagged along with a group of sommeliers all over, north all the way to Rome. And it was with a guy by the name of Lars Light, who was with the Banffy wine group. And I want to say this the right way. He tried to kill me with Amaro. We had Fernet Branca in the morning, in the afternoon, before and after every drink. We'd pour it in our espresso. It was an incredible baptism of fire, especially with Fernet, but also a number of other things. What was your way that you were introduced?
That's a good question of how I was introduced, but I do know Lars also played, I think it's like the Pied Piper of maybe Fernet.
Right.
In this sense, I remember the first time I had Fernet, we had just touched down in Rome. He picked us up at the airport. We went to the Auto Grill. We had an espresso, we had a shot of Fernet, and we got some like porchetta sandwiches to take in the car. And it was like breakfast of champions, Italian style. So that's one thing we've got, Jason.
It's going to sound crazy, but now my crew and I, jet lag, that feeling and the taste of Amaro are like the same thing. It's like when you have a smell and you remember like an ex and you're like, I remember they smell like that. When I smell Fernet, I think of jet lag. It's like my ex and my future love at the same time happening, because jet lag is a very strange process. So, okay, when we talk about Amaro, so you said bitterness defines it. And I think the bitter quality, when you and I, before we recorded, that's probably the only thing I know of that they all have, aside from, I think they're all liquid. They're all liquid, they all have alcohol, and they're all bitter to some extent. And so we've got a few in front of us right now.
Correct.
When we talk about it, so you said it's not just Italy.
Correct.
Okay. Where else can I make, because wine is so defined by, I don't know, rules, and so is a lot of beverage. I mean, Scotch has to be made in a certain way, and, bourbon and Amaro, it seems to me that you could make it anywhere. So where does it exist? Where have you had some? I guess Italy's my, backyard for this that I think of.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, Italy's where it gets its most notoriety. That's the homeland, I would say, for Amari. And then, but it's, they're making it all over the world. And I mean, I had some from Brooklyn the other day. They're from Trinidad. They make them down there. There's Germany, all over the place. And I think that's one of the challenges, that there's not really a terroir that you can identify from it, or a style. Like if you're tasting Scotch and say, okay, this has a lot of peat from it in it. It must be a single malt Scotch, or being able to distinguish between a single malt and a Japanese whiskey, and a bourbon and a Canadian whiskey. With Amaro, because the category is so general, I think it's very hard to have that sense of place. But it also gives people a lot of freedom to create unique styles that are delicious, at least to them, and allows you to try a lot of different ones and introduce people to a lot of new flavors as well.
So when you come to the bitterness, I think this is really the interesting thing, because traveling through Italy, one of the things that I think is the most, I hear all the time, that people are so confused by Italian wine. And the reason is, it's not that Italian wine is confusing, it's that Italy is a very dense place with a lot of traditions. And, you go, in some cases, you go 2 kilometers and it's a totally different pasta. There's a very different, way of, in some cases, there's different ways of approaching music in that town. But Amaros seem to be part and parcel with, down to a different restaurant has their own Amaro. And you really get this incredible thing, but what really defines it is what makes it bitter. What is the thing? So for me, when I was with Lars on that trip that I was speaking of, I remember he poured Cynar for us, which is something I've got so many times since then, but was blown away to find out that it's made from artichokes. And when you think about a drink made from artichokes, it's just something that I wasn't thinking about, sugar, artichokes, but the artichokes are the thing that makes it bitter. What are some of the things that people use to make the drinks bitter? And then we'll get into Fernet and all these fun things.
Yeah, there's, if you think about it, there's a lot of, herbs, spices, fruits, barks, flowers, and such. And if you look back at the history of Amaro, well, they're making it with what's around them. So if people are going to make an Amaro, chances are most of those ingredients are from around them. It's not as though they're ordering them on Amazon or going to their local health store, picking up gentian and all the different herbs and barks, peppermint and orange peel and peppermint, like all this stuff. So I think that's where it starts, with what's grown around them and what they have for the bittering agent of it. And, if you think about when they came on, or when they were introduced, or most popular, I guess, back in the day, is when they had for medicinal purposes. And so basically there was the guy that said, hey, I blend this together, and this is what makes my headache go away. This is what makes my shoulder not hurt, and have a little bit of this. So that's where they originally had medicinal purposes. And so that's before they were enjoyed in restaurants. That's where people were enjoying them. So it wasn't necessarily because they tasted delicious, because at that point in time, if you're way back when, I guess you're probably in like the 1200s maybe, they're making these that they're just very bitter. And that's what supposedly cures all the ailments. And then as the spice trades and commerce kind of evolved, and you started having, people bring sugar or bringing in other things from other ports, it allowed them to add sugar to them or to sweeten them and make them more palatable.
It's really cool because, with wine, you don't often, if people call like, they smell a flower or they taste some type of fruit in the wine that is aside from grapes, or a blue fruit or something that's not actually in there. But with an Amaro, if you taste orange or some kind of peel, or that oftentimes it's in there. They can actually ferment or add these flavors, and I think that makes this really, really, really incredibly versatile. And if there wasn't so much history behind it, it would seem like there were no rules whatsoever. I have one in front of me here called Kloster Bitter, which is from an area that is now part of Italy called Alto Adige. But, for a very long time, it was part of Austria, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They speak Tyrolean German. So like Germans can't even, technically, if you live in Berlin, you have no idea what these people are talking about. It's a completely different language. And there's a monastery up there, and the Kloster Bitter is made from pine cones. It is just wild stuff. And I really like it a lot. And we pull it out. I've had this bottle, because Amaro is not something, especially in this concentrate of a form, that you drink constantly. But I've had this for years, which brings me to my next question. Does it age, or what is does it go bad? It doesn't seem to from my collection here.
For a second, I thought you were going to go into like a Christopher Walken. I've had this bottle of
This
is your birthright. This is your birthright.
I hid this miserable hunk of glass. And now, little man, I give it to you. Pulp Fiction reference. Okay.
So yes, it can age. I think that's something that is really, really neat. You see it in some places here in the US, but anytime I'm in Italy or in Europe looking for those dusty bottles that are on the back of a little coffee shop or the back bar at a restaurant, and usually out of reach, and there's somebody who has no idea what it was or what it is, and say, "Oh, can I get a glass of that?" And it's really cool because you're transported in time. And you look at that just like with wine. It's really hard, though, to really understand at what point in time that bottle's made. There's obviously not vintages on it, but to see that and taste the difference, maybe it was made differently, what ingredients were available to them before people started to say, oh, it's commercialized. How can we get, we need to amp up production? Are there
There's opium in it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think it takes on more of it depends on the Amaro, but usually more of a caramely note. There's maybe a little bit of sort of oxidation that happens in there that changes it. And, if you think about like the citrus flavors in wine, I think if you're having those orange characteristics, it takes on more of that caramelized or dried orange peel. So they all evolve differently. And I think that's one of the fun things is you get to try it and figure out how it compares to maybe whatever the benchmark is that now, and try and connect the dots between the two.
Right. So with these, are they traditionally, I know I've mostly had them after dinner, unless of course you're with somebody who's a fanatic and then you have it constantly, but which I've been many trips. But, and I really do have to stress how different these are. I think if you have the wrong Amaro for the first one you have, something that's incredibly bitter or really strong, you get this vision in your mind that they're astringent and big. And I do love those ones too, very much, maybe more than the lighter ones. But, you introduced me to Amaro Nonino a long time ago, which is very citrusy, very light. It's an incredible mixer in a cocktails. Your master experience on Sam TV, you use it in one of your cocktails. And so I'm trying to figure out what I wanted to get to is, first, when do you drink these and when are they supposed to be drank, especially starting as medicine? That's a weird thing to put into a meal. And then let's get into like, where do you start with these things? Some brands we can get. And I do want to talk about Fernet because I do think it's a really important one on the scale. So, let's talk about where you drink it in the meal. Or do you need a meal? I mean,
since when did you need a reason to drink anything, Jason?
I don't. Unfortunately, I have children. I've got Sam TV. And between those two things, I basically work at Anheuser-Busch. So, yeah.
Well, I think that, again, it goes back to the challenging part of Amaro is that, you have aperitifs that can be categorized as Amaro. So if you're talking about Campari, Aperol, those all have a bitter component to them. Some vermouths, they have wormwood in those. And then you have like, the traditional kind we're talking about that are digestifs after the meal. So I think you can really have them all over the place. And, how to start. I think you mentioned Nonino. I think that's one of the gateway Amaros in my mind, where it's, you don't want to come out of the gate and say, hey, here's some Varnelli or here's some Fernet to somebody that's not used to drinking that, because you'll probably scare them off. But having something like a Nonino and being able to serve it in the right context, whether it's, having it, or let's go back to the Campari, having Campari and having Aperol side by side, you can start to see, okay, they're from the same family. They're both bitter. One's has a little more citrus to it. Then you can sort of show the evolution of it and put it in, soda water and taste how that evolves and almost like a spritz of sorts, and throw it in cocktails. And I think the same can happen with Nonino in terms of, having it in a paper plane, which is one of my favorite cocktails, having it, put it in make a Manhattan with it for people. But I think there's lots of different ways to help people become introduced or open-minded to Amaro. And it adds a little bit of, it's like salt and pepper, like season it just a little bit and then kind of push the envelope a little bit more. And then next thing you know, they're drinking right from the bottle like you do.
That's right. Well, it is one of those kind of like, there is a growing phase. I don't think you ever don't like the first ones you've had, but I do think you become more adventurous in trying these. I mean, some of these, I'm telling you, I have a couple of Amaros in the house. What's the plural of Amaro?
Amari.
I have a couple
with an I.
I have some Amari in the house that are really, I mean, they pucker your lips, the tannins in them and the bitterness really, I mean, your mouth dries out and it's incredible. I don't know if any of the listeners have had that I guess kind of goofy drink called Underberg. It's like that little bottle that's in paper, and you rip it off and you drink it, and it's God, you could light that on fire. There's so much alcohol in it, but I mean that's an Amaro, right? And it's all digestive, It
is, and if you think about it, when we talk about them being for medicinal purposes, they were basically. When you drink something bitter, your body's reaction is it kind of gets the body moving, if you will.
To expel it.
Yes, exactly. And it's very similar. Like if you get a virus, your body's reaction is, I'm going to make you have a fever so you can sweat out whatever that virus is. And so those bittering agents back in the day, when they thought they had medicinal purposes, was it really got everything going.
Especially after a big meal, I guess.
Exactly. Huh? Yeah.
I think it's like, I'm surprised fiber didn't just completely market correct this entire genre. But no, it's it makes a lot of sense. It creates a reaction, and we get
Which would you prefer? Would you like how many bowls of colon blow would you like versus how many bowls of Fernet?
Well, that's why in the morning I start my day off with a Fernet. People say oatmeal, and I'm like, nope, Fernet is the proper way to
keep
start.
You regular. Yes, exactly.
Oh God. I hope people listening don't actually try this, but try it. Okay, so when we talk about kind of where we start, so you talked about Aperol, Campari. Those are the really deep red colored liqueurs, not liqueurs, but aperitifs that you see at most bars for cocktails and such are straight. Where do we go from there, and how do we get to, where do you put Fernet on the scale?
Well, I think it's also interesting too is. Like when I was in Italy this couple months ago, I'm always trying to say, oh, what do you have that I haven't seen? Like, what can't I get in the United States? And trying those. And so you usually get a couple of them, you try them side by side. And I think just like with wine, to be able to taste different varietals side by side helps you calibrate and understand the differences and say, okay, if you're trying a couple different Fernets, what is different? Is one more menthol? Is one more or the really, really harsh, aggressive style of Fernet? And I think that's a good way of trying them side by side, and then to understand what your palate is and how to calibrate on that sense. So where to go from there? I think it all depends on the palate. Some people really like bitter, some people don't. But by trying them, the way I hedge my bets is when I'm with my girlfriend, we'll order, 2 or 3, and then we'll kind of do a little taste and which one does she want? Great. And then I'll drink the other 2. And I always end up winning that way.
Yeah, that's right.
So
that's right. I really do think the sommelier and to some extent, the wine, I guess, writing community, maybe? Is that a community? Are the people that have really, truly put me on to this beverage, which is so different than everything else. I can't, many of you listening, you're screaming out loud listening to the podcast thinking, mention the one I love. And that's why I love this beverage, because if you know, that cliched thing, if you know, you know. And when it comes to this, I think Fernet was the one we talked about earlier, drinking it in Italy and all this stuff, but I didn't realize that Fernet was an entire class of different Amaros, different usages, different levels of herbalness. I'm holding in front of me a Fernet Gancia, which is just fantastic. It's much, much, much stronger in a good way than Fernet Branca, which you can find at most restaurants, I think, in the United States and definitely in Europe. And they make a mint version of that.
I got turned on to that. Like I never really, I had the mint version a couple of times, didn't think much of it. But when I was in Italy in, what was it, like September or or August and it was scorching hot, like at the end of lunch, having some Fernet Menta shaken and then just strained and given to you was like a ice cold York peppermint patty that was just so refreshing and delicious. Now I have a bottle of Menta in my freezer that is just, in case of emergency, open and pour over a rock, and it's better than Scope.
Better than Scope, yes. It's great to go back to the sales floor. I think for me, one thing that Lars did when we were in Italy, and Lars is now, I think he's with the Somm Journal, and he's just a force of nature, but truly loves Amaro. What he did is he would order an affogato, which is a little bit of ice cream with your espresso, but he would also get a shot of that Fernet Mint. And so you'd mix all of those things. And the ice cream, provided it was all consumed at the right moment, you had this cold ice cream at the top, this hot coffee, and then surrounding it like Saturn's rings was this mint Fernet that was bitter and interacted with the ice cream and interacted with the tannins in the coffee. And I'm telling you, when you're jet lagged, you need sugar, alcohol, and caffeine all in one delicious, incredible explosion. It is a hell of a drink. I don't know if it has a name. I'll call it the Lars. But it was a truly amazing thing. And I've every once in a while, I'll have people over for dinner and we'll do something like that. And everyone thinks, that I invented it. I didn't. It's a truly incredible drink.
That sensation you just described took me back to my childhood. Not that I drank a lot of Fernet or espresso as a child growing up in Columbus, Ohio, but I did a lot of ice cream sundaes at McDonald's and getting like the caramel ice cream sundae and, with peanuts on it and being able to have like the cold, the hot, the salty, the sweet, like all those flavors at once. And I think that's like, think about the architecture of an amazing dish when you can have all those different flavor profiles happening at once. It's really amazing. And that's a grown-up version, a really grown-up version, and a really delicious one too.
Yeah. And so Fernet, let's talk about Fernet. So Fernet, for those of you who have had it, I'm sure you've either had it a lot or you've not tried it. There's probably not much of a middle ground. And I wonder, how do we start talking about it? What is it? I want to use Fernet because I think anyone listening to the podcast can go for their next dinner and afterwards get a Fernet afterwards. So I think Fernet's a good place to start.
Sure. It is a category. And I think, like you, I don't think I realized that till a couple of years ago. Like when I started seeing them all over, like, I thought there was just Fernet Branca. And then, there's all these different kinds of Fernets. And in kind of looking into it, I believe it actually was named after like a Swedish pharmacist, but came from Milan. And again, going back to the medicinal purposes of it, where it's very, very pronounced herbaceous characteristic to it. It's something that it's almost like a proving point. Like if you can take down Fernet, then okay, you can beat your chest after your meal and said, I'm the boss. Whether or not, that appeals to everybody, I haven't tried too many other kinds. I think that'd be really fascinating to try a flight of a number of different Fernets and see. But I can imagine that they're all over the spectrum in terms of, their palatability, I guess, for different people.
I mean, the one I'm drinking, this one I mentioned, Fernet Gancia, is like the peppermint bark aspect of it is, it's almost like, Buster Douglas punching you in the face with peppermint. It's really serious, but it's also kind of that like you beat him in the end. Feeling of victory. It's like an incredible like rush of all of these different things. And I mean it in the most positive way. It sounds like a weird way to describe a drink.
You should write shelf talkers for them. Maybe you reach out to them and see if you can help them out.
Yeah. It's Wilford Wong and I.
I had one a couple weeks ago, and looking on lists around New York, you just see the same usual suspects. And it was one I hadn't seen before, and I don't know if I'm even pronouncing it right. Elisar Novalis, and I was like, "Oh, this looks interesting. Packaging's amazing." And we ordered a shot of it after dinner, and it came out, and I put it in my mouth. I was like, "Wow, this is probably what like the first time I had Fernet, what it tasted like to me." Except this one tasted like roots, dirt, pine tar, like resin, and just like, this is not delicious for me. And I realized, okay, that's not.
So it's like everything on a baseball player's shoe is what you had.
Exactly, right. And sometimes you have to cross the line to know where it is. And I think I now have come back a little bit and kind of understand where that line is for me.
Okay,
to each their own.
To each their own, especially. Well, speaking of to each their own, I mean, you're on the pod because you have one of the I know I have this range in front of me. I should mention, what do you have in front of you? Describe those things. But then the last one is why you're on the pod. I mean,
okay, got it. So I just had some Reserve Especial from Braulio, the 2017, which is definitely more in that Alpine characteristic. I'm probably going backwards now. And the next one I'm getting ready to pour is
well, they vintage that. So 2017, they vintage this.
2017.
And what's the reason?
Special bottling.
Is it just that each vintage is different? Meaning they put different ingredients in, not that it's different weather-wise or something like that?
They are all a little different. I can't tell you exactly how. I have.
Well, they probably wouldn't tell you because it's always like some state secret thing.
They're all following after those monks. Those Carthusian monks.
That's right.
With it, the next one I'm pouring right now is a Vecchio Amaro da Capo, and this is one that I brought back from Italy. It's their 100th anniversary one, which I think is delicious, from Calabria. And then I have another one actually from Calabria too, the Jefferson, that I hadn't had before, that is more citrusy, probably the lightest of those. I think you're talking about like those gateway ones. I think Jefferson falls in there. And then this one that's in a ball jar is one that I actually, my first time trying to make Amaro. And it just came off the lees, if you will, about 2 weeks ago, and then diluted it down to about 30% alcohol, and then sweetened it and add a little bit of vanilla, and letting it kind of come together and revisiting it every once in a while.
So what is the process? How did you have I know there's not a lot of pressure. You're not trying to sell this, your livelihood's not on the line, but how did you first have the guts to go, I'm going to make an Amaro, and where did you start? Did you find a recipe online? Did you talk to people? Did you just go at it? And how did you make it?
So I Googled a lot. I read Brad Parson. He has an amazing book called Amaro, and he has a number of different recipes in there. Mm-hmm. And I think through that approach, it also helps you kind of understand why Amaros are sort of different. There's different seasonal ones that he put in there for each season of the year. And if you can think about, if you're in Sicily, what you have around you is much different than what you'd have when you're up in Alto Adige. And sure. For this one, I started, a friend of mine, Dave Yoshida, we were together at a MS exam. He saw me reading the book. He's like, oh, talking about making some. He's like, oh, I've made some. And I asked him for kind of his recipe. He sent me the recipe. I looked at it, and it was pretty daunting. I think there's like 20 herbs and spices on there, or herbs and barks and all different types of leaves and trees and stuff. And I was like, okay, so now I get to go shopping. And then he's like, hey, I actually have all these ingredients, so I'm happy to help pull some together and give some to you. So he gave me some, and he said, I have to warn you though, you're going to get stopped at the airport with this. So we did our little trade in the hotel lobby in St. Louis, and I got on the plane, and went to the airport, and sure enough, I got stopped by TSA, and made it through, fortunately, and then macerated it for 5 weeks. I got a bottle of 50 proof vodka and just put it in there and forgot about it for 5 weeks, and then strained it off and sweetened it up, and there we go. So that's one way of making it. But I've also heard that there's people that will then macerate each of the herbs separately and then sort of do their own little blend. This is my first go at it, and I wasn't patient, so I said I'm just going to throw them all together in the jar, and we'll see what happens. And if it's
it's almost like pickling. It's almost like pickling in a way, in a very strange way, right? You have instead of vinegar or something like that, you have a base alcohol.
Yeah, neutral base alcohol. I mean, you can use Everclear. You can use high proof vodka, and then obviously you're going to dilute that down. So into using just to kind of cut it and get to the alcohol level that you like, and go from there.
How is it?
It's freaking delicious.
That's great.
I was very impressed for the first time. Like, I didn't know you never know. I mean, I don't use a lot of those different herbs that often. And so what are they going to taste like after 5 weeks? And, who knows, but it was really well balanced. And now I can go back and say, okay, what do I want to, add a little bit more of? Is it the wild cherry bark? Is it the cardamom? Is it the, chamomile, licorice root, whatever that is, depending on the style. This one came out and it was probably more along the Alpine kind of Braulio flavor than the citrusy characteristic, but I'm sure I could add some more of the bitter orange or some different zests and stuff to that as well.
Okay, great. Do you have a ability to give me a small mason jar, like a little guy that I can try?
Oh, do you want anything in that mason jar, or just you want a small mason jar?
I just want a small mason jar with whatever illegal substances you are trafficking across the country.
So next time we meet, I will bring some for us to raise a glass with. I'll ask a question. What about Amaro cocktails? Are there any that you're a big fan of?
I'll be honest with you. Most of these Amaros are are really interesting in a concentrated way that you can cut them, like you said, with some, spritzer and some form of, usually it's a little bit more of a citrus, whether it's a rind or actually the juice. Some of my favorite cocktails are literally just it and cutting it with a sparkling water. And it's truly, it opens up the way a lot of, liquors do and things like that. It's really stupendous. I could drink Amaro Nonino. A lot of us are at events where it's, you have to go. You always have to be on. You need to be able to drink, or you want to be able to drink at least. And so I think a lot of us lean on like Campari and soda or things like that, or Amaro Nonino. These are not incredibly high alcohol drinks. If you cut them, they're delicious. They're wonderful things. They're a great summer thing by the pool. Honestly, that would be my answer. Something simple.
Cynar makes a great spritz, like making Cynar spritzes.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's winter and you're drinking, maybe more stirred cocktails at home. Have used a lot more Fernet in that, just a little bit. A little goes a long way, almost like a rinse in some sense. Like the Hanky Panky is a delicious cocktail that uses Fernet in there. There's one that I had out of Jim Meehan's book that was delicious. They call it the Newark. And it has Laird's apple brandy. There's a little sweet vermouth, Fernet Branca, and maraschino liqueur. That's freaking delicious. That's in rotation, heavy rotation. Boulevardier, I guess that, has Campari in there and sweet vermouth. So both of those would be considered cocktails that have Amari in them.
Have you ever heard of when I bartended for years, there was, I had a customer who did Black Manhattans. Do you know Black Manhattan?
I don't.
It has, it doesn't really, you're supposed to use Cynar is what I think was supposed to be in it, or a Amaro Nonino or something like that. But it's bitters, you have like a bunch of different kind of bitters, Angostura, you have orange bitters, you have a cherry garnish, and then you use rye whiskey. So it's definitely not a true Manhattan, but you use basically whiskey and Amaro as the two, melting pot, and then you use bitters on top of it. It was something that I had a couple who would get them, and I'm telling you, they could put them back, and they were regulars, and it was a drink I made all the time, and it's delicious. You would love this as a cocktail guy, and then they would be really snobby about the cherry. So like, at most restaurants you have decent cherries,
maraschino, red,
like those ones that were embalmed in the late 1800s somewhere in Pittsburgh, or you have actual real cherries, and then there's, as you know better than I do, higher levels of really good cocktail cherries. And they were really particular about that. My tips reflected the cherries that I was willing to put in there. So that's the one that rings a bell as a Black Manhattan.
Yeah. And I think that's the great thing about Amari is that there's so many different kinds out there that for most people, it's a chance to introduce them to something new and to try something new rather than, it's the same chocolate, vanilla, strawberry. There's so many different renditions of it. So.
This is great. This is fantastic. I just wanted to, I tweeted out, I want to talk about Amaros on the Som TV podcast, got a ton of comments back. And then you responded, hey, I just made my first Amaro. And you'd have probably been the person I talked to anyway about this, but it was like, all right, culture, like we have to talk about Amaros. So it's kind of great that we get to do this. This is the fun part of my job.
I agree. Now, I think to make it even more fun, we needed to go take a road trip, take the show on the road, and try some together, probably in the motherland.
Do you think people would watch if you went to Italy and you spent, how much time do you think you need to give a full picture of Amaros? Some human stories in there. How much time you need in Italy?
You gave me 6 months, and I'm sure I can get all my relatives to tune in. All my relatives will tune in. I'll get them all subscriptions to Som TV. Yeah.
You're like shooting Avatar.
Unless if you're sending the Som TV helicopter with me and we can do that, then that's much quicker, But honestly, like I'm a professional. I could probably power through in a good week, and we could go do some north-south, and we could see a lot of different variations of it. We could try a lot together and meet a lot of amazing people. So if that's the elevator pitch you were looking for, then count me in. It
sounds good. The Som TV helicopter is basically you on Dustin Wilson's back running, down a street with a few drinks in you. But
that's not really a helicopter sound, is it?
It's good enough. I think it's basically what ours sounds like. So this is great. Sob, thanks for being on. And everybody go out. I want to know if you guys put Amaros into a cocktail, or you have one that's off the beaten path that we can actually get a hold of, or you want to send me and Sabato a bottle of something that's incredible that we haven't tried, hit us up. We're both on Twitter, Instagram, all over the place. You can't miss, especially Sabato. He's very famous in Germany. Sob, it's good to have you on. And we will talk very soon. Okay, bud?
Sounds great. Cheers, Jason.
All right, cheers. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I want to remind you, this podcast is for you. And if you guys want to hear, there's guests you love or topics you want to hear about or people you want to see back on, hit us up. We are on social media. We read our DMs. We interact with everybody. So please hit us up on Instagram, on Twitter, @Som_films. And let us know. I'm Jason B. Wise on Twitter and on Instagram. Today's pod was mixed by Alex McCourt and produced by Nadine Netman. As always, we love you guys. And go to somtv.com, $49.99 for a year. Help us keep doing this. All right, we'll talk to you guys soon. Be safe.